walk into a house that's completely different, and you can even see this in your own room if you want. Everything's in complete disarray. You can't even look at that place. You're sick the moment you cross the threshold, because everywhere you look, there's parts of untransformed chaos yelling to you, do something about this, loser. If you walk into your study and you have a stack of papers in the midst of which is buried your homework, you'll notice that you have a very tough time looking at that stack of papers. And the reason for that is that the stack of papers that you're ignoring, that's aging and causing you more trouble with each passing day, is a porthole into order through which chaos is flowing. And if you ignore that long enough, the chaos will flow through that portal and take over your room and then take over your life. And you might think, well, that's a very strange way of looking at things. And I suppose it is. But just as an experiment to see whether or not this is true, try not paying your taxes for 10 years and see what happens. This is an old representation, right? Atlas with the world. Well, it's a representation that says that that's the proper way to live, right? That the way that you live properly so that you can withstand the nature of your own being is to pick up a load that's heavy enough so that if you carry it, you have some self-respect. That's a very weird idea, because it's frequently the case that people do everything they can to lighten their load. But the problem with carrying a light load is that then you have nothing that's useful to do. And if you have nothing useful to do, all you have around you, unless you're extremely fortunate, and that will only be the case for very short periods of time, is meaningless suffering. And there's nothing worse for your soul than meaningless suffering. If you look around, you see the people that you respect, and I don't mean that you think about respecting, I mean the ones that your gut, your whole being, your embodied being tells you to respect. You'll see that it's always people who've picked up something heavy and are carrying it successfully. You think, now that's what it means to be a human being. And when you see that, you can think, well, perhaps life is worthwhile, despite the fact that the essential nature of reality is suffering. There's an old Jewish idea, and the idea is that man and God are, in a sense, twins. It's a very strange idea, but it seems to hinge on something like this. The classic attributes of God, these are the attributes of the absolute, are omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. Do anything, be anything. Can't translate the other one momentarily. There's a question that goes along with that. What is a being that's characterized by the absolute attributes of God lack? And the answer to that is limitation. And that's an unbelievably interesting idea. And the reason it's so interesting is because one of the things that modern psychology is increasingly telling us is that without the limitation that a creature like us, with the structure of our consciousness, brings to bear on the world, there's no reality. That what reality is an emergent consequence of the interaction between something that's painfully limited, like us, and whatever the absolute is, which is something that is completely without borders. And what that implies, in a sense, is that without limitation, there's no being. With limitation, there's suffering. Without suffering, then, there's no being. Well, you might think, well, perhaps there should be no being. And lots of people act their whole lives in order to see if they can make that a possibility. And that's really a luxury we don't have anymore. But the alternative is to presume that being is worth the suffering, and to find a mode of being that allows you to make that claim in reality. And I would say, in a sense, that's your existential destiny. And if you're here at university rather than at trade school, your job is to figure out how to be a human being. And that's a much more important job than any specific, time-limited, concrete, pragmatic plan. You have an unlimited possibility for good, really. Individuals are way more powerful than they think. They're more powerful for evil, but they're also more powerful for good. These archaic stories that I've been telling you about, they have something to say to you. They say, life is uncertain. You'll never know enough. And not only that, you never can know enough. And not only that, everything that you stand on is shaky. And then they say, but you still have to stand on it. And while you're standing on it, you have to improve it. And that's how life goes on, and that's how you live your life. And if you forget those things, or if you undermine them, you're in the same situation that the unfortunate man was that I told you about in the Old Testament, who reached out to touch something he should have left alone. To the degree that you're human, you have to abide by a certain set of truths. The truths that I told you about today are, as far as I can tell, something that's close to a minimal set. There's chaos. There's order. You're stuck with both of them. And they both have a cost. And they both have advantages. And your job is to figure out how to serve as the appropriate mediator between the two. And you can tell when you're doing that, because when you're doing that, the dismal circumstances of your life manifest themselves to you as eminently acceptable. And it's in that situation that you know that you've placed yourself in a position in nature where everything is in harmony. And that's the place to aim for. Nice talking to you.